Welcome to episode 38 of the World Builders Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram, and today's topic is world building religions and fantasy states. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builders Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. Welcome back again to the episode for World Building Religions and Fantasy States. And this is going to feel very similar to the last episode, except we're talking about different elements, and there's a little bit more to look at with religions. That's why I wanted to break it apart a bit. One, I typically, much like races, link my religions to the culture. And it's from the cultures the states derive its list of religions. So once again, we're going to go back to that Scrivener folder that I have, where I have, much like I do for states, I have a fantasy religions folder. But what I want to do is inside my folder for the state I'm working on, the country I'm working on, I want to have a document for religious links. And this is really be referring to the main data will be stored in the other file that will talk about the pantheon, all the different parts of that might or might not exist for that specific religion. However, my list here, my links will say what is the religion, and I'll know what the differences are, because the way the Greeks in Athens worshipped might not have been exactly the same as the Greeks in Marcella or Syracuse or a different area. Especially you get down to Egypt, where it's like Hellenized Greeks that were in control after Alexander the Great. But there's definitely a heavy adoption of a lot of the Egyptian pantheon. And some religions that might or might not cause you to have multiple religions, or it might create a new religion. That's kind of up to you on how you want to deal with that. But what I do here is I like to track the changes. So once again, what percentage of the population follows this religion? And once again, when I talk about a percentage of the population, I don't need whole numbers. You shouldn't track whole numbers unless you need that information for something. You want to present it in a travel guide-like thing for your world or an encyclopedia-like entry for your world, you might want to have what the population is. And when we talk about religion, you might want to talk about you'd still probably talk about the percentages when you get down into race and religion and cultures. When did the religion first appear? And I don't discern too much with it. If it's sort of like this Bronze Age religion that is sort of swelled up from a Stone Age religion, even though they're probably two different religions in reality, and there's been a lot of evolvement to get it to where it is, I just consider it one religion. But when did it first start? What is the state influence on the religion? Is it a theocracy? A country like Iran? Or is it a non-theocracy? A country like, say, Britain? I don't think they're a theocracy. Some people might argue they are. I don't know. But in my opinion, they're not. Sorry if I've offended anyone who thinks they are a theocracy. Okay, but essentially, is the church ruled by the state? Is the state maybe not rule it, but maybe the center of the religion's there? Maybe there are important holy sites there. Those would be state influences over religion, because they could hold or allow access to certain holy sites for a religion, and they have the force of arms and the military to enforce it. Now, they might not be able to truly enforce it over time, but states can try, and that's an influence over religion. Now, another important thing to keep in mind is the religion approved by the state? And that's not to mean there's like this formal, like, thou art allowed to be Lutheran, or thou art allowed to be Jewish. It's not that. Does the state approve of the religion? Usually if they approve of it and they're not a theocracy, it's more implied. However, if they disapprove of it, that would probably be codified in laws or the way rulers react to people of that religion. And if it's not approved, you need to know what are the consequences for being caught performing that religion. Is it being ostracized? Is it being forced to pay a tax? Is it being thrown to the lions, covered in pitch and lit on fire? what is the consequence of being caught in a religion that is outlawed? And maybe it's not outlawed. Maybe there is social unrest about it. I'd record that here too. There could be arguments made, whether or not they're true is unimportant to this podcast, but that the Muslim religion's under fire in this country because of the war on terror and its connection to Islam. Once again, whether or not it's true, it's unimportant. There are no real laws restricting Islam, but there's definitely a lot of anecdotal evidence at a minimum that shows that Muslim people are having a more difficult time doing the same type of task that other people are. Now, the validity of that is yours to choose. It's not part of this podcast. Another thing, too, is are there any exceptions to religion in this area? So, for example, maybe there's a religious ceremony that just, for some reason, doesn't get covered here anymore. And they're really still the same basic religion. There's just subtle differences. And that can be really meaningful in a story. Take, for example, and I got this from, I think it was called The Crusades. It was a documentary by Terry Jones from Monty Python fame. Back when the History Channel first started out, it was a great series covering the Crusades. And one of the things that I always stuck with me is in the first Crusade, the first half of it were just like hundreds of thousands of people just charging the Holy Land. And they weren't soldiers, they were peasants who were being rabble-roused and being led off to go retake Jerusalem. Now, they started running into issues once they started crossing into the Balkans. And I assume this is still true today. I don't know if it is, but there's the sort of the famous Catholic thing where they put their head on their hand and then their belly button and then I think their heart and then the other side. And I could have this backwards because I'm not Catholic. But the Orthodoxy did it backwards where it started at the top and I think goes to the bottom, but then it goes to the left and right instead of the right to the left. It's something as subtle as two of the directions that are flipped in the order. And that caused a lot of chaos when the Catholics found them. Some of them thought they were devil worshippers. They weren't Christians. You had, when they first were shuttled across into Anatolia by the Byzantine emperor, you would have towns boiled alive. Now, that was probably because they thought they were Muslim and not because they were doing the cross on their body incorrectly. But the point's valid. Subtle changes in a religion, especially if it's a highly volatile time in the religion where there's a huge battle in the mind of the people, especially if it's a violent battle between good and evil. Even subtle differences can cause serious consequences, leading to and perhaps exceeding death, depending on how strong magic is in your world. So you have to keep those in mind. And once again, as in all my topics, this can change over time. You could have a new religion come forth. People probably would have told you were crazy if a new religion was going to form in Rome during the time of Augustus Caesar. However, by the time of Constantine, when he became a Christian, that's what I'm talking about. Religions can change. So you have to keep that in mind, and it will have profound consequences in a country. And something you have to think about when a religion changes, if they're nowhere similar, what are the impacts on that state and the cultures in that state, and do those lead to new cultures, or do they ripple out into the culture beyond the state? Now, the rating for this episode, it's a basic rating. You need to know how the religions are incorporated into your states. Whether or not you go through cultures like I do is up to you, but you want to know the religions of the state you're talking about. If you don't talk about it at all, well, I guess you don't, but I think there's going to always, especially on an Earth-like fantasy, there are going to be moments where there's overlap with religion, and the people reading it might not realize it's a religious, significant thing that's happening, but sometimes they'll give you details of things that people can do. Maybe a certain way that you greet someone is actually a religious significance. So it can give you some interesting, deep details, whether or not the readers or the people interacting with the story realize it comes from the religion. It can add a lot more depth to a story. The real world task for the day. Take that culture you were working on from the last episode, add in a religion document, and same thing as before, go through and link the religions and just the areas we talk about here. If they're not relevant, don't list them. If there's other things that you want to know that you can think of that are specific, put those in there. The real world task for the day: do your part to make your marriage fun. I know this sounds weird, but I hear all the time about people having issues with their spouse, whether it's wives with husbands or husbands with wives. And it seems like to me there's a group of people who just don't want to spend time with their spouse. And now maybe for me it's different because I married my wife because we were friends and I loved her. It was more than just I loved her and I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. So wherever I can interact, I do, and we try and have fun together. Because if you're having fun together and you have common goals, I think personally, at least in my experience, it really can help your relationship. So do your part to make it fun. And now the tease for this episode. My next interview is up, Anna Questerly. And as always, make sure to go to gardul.com. That's GARDUL.com for the show notes. It'll be under podcasting, World Builders Anvil. That's a great place to get all of the information from the episode that you've just listened to and to see all the resources that we've talked about in this episode. Thanks for joining us this episode of the World Builders Anvil. Please be sure to rate and review us in iTunes, and please help get the word out to your friends about our show. And join me, Jeffrey W. Ingram at gardul.com, to see the progress of my world and learn why I made the choices I did. And please contact me and let me know the topics you would love to hear in the future. Now strike while the myth rolls high.